Hi, I'm Cameron Powell. I work with High Performance Story. My background began in the law and then moved to fundraising and startups, and I'm also a writer. So I'm very interested in the art and science of how human minds are persuaded primarily, whether they like it or understand that it's so or not, by story, by emotion. And emotion is evoked by story, by a relatable protagonist proceeding through obstacles. So in the hero's journey that you can see in any Hollywood blockbuster, think Star Wars, there's a hero with some kind of lack or deficit. Luke wandering around Tatooine, just bored to tears and so forth. And in the hero's journey in the startup context, the hero, it can be you, it can be the product, to some extent it's even the customer. But we're going to talk a little bit about how to tell that story and weave it into something, what I call a fundable pitch deck. So let me go ahead and share with you my screen. I'm not seeing my...
Cameron, just one note. Go ahead and turn off your video first and then share your screen. Thank you. All right. Great. Thank you.
All right. So this deck, a slightly different version of this is on my website at highperformancestory.com. So it's got a lot of notes in the notes section. I won't be going through all of it. One of the first things we like to focus on is simply, are you clear about the purpose of why you're pitching? It's okay to pitch for feedback. What can hurt your reputation more is if you're not really ready to pitch for money, but you think you're pitching for money instead of to get feedback. So sometimes you can still get funding if you've got some problems. You see them on the left. But there are some things that can make it really hard to be ready to pitch for funding, which is your product market fit and MVP really aren't convincing. And particularly, you don't have any traction, and you think you want to get some money in order to create traction. That can harm your reputation. It can ruin your chance with certain investors. Now, in a typical deck, you might look at about 15 slides. I'll show you those in a minute. The longer pitches that you get, if you have a full sort of pitch opportunity, usually are about 20 minutes. Sometimes you're even given more time, but don't take that more time. Try to keep your pitch to 20 minutes or less if you're in that format. And of course, if you're doing a 6 or 8 minute pitch, do that instead. Typically, you don't want your fonts to be too small. It makes it hard for people to read. It also encourages people to read, and you don't want them to do that while you're talking. So these more or less are the 15 subjects or topics of your slides. It doesn't mean you just have only 15 or 16 slides, but these are the topics you want to address, and approximately in this order. You'll note, if you look at number 5 and number 14, if your traction is strong, consider putting that up front, where it can quickly quell investors' already burgeoning objections to, well, is this really a pain, and are you really solving the pain? Oh my gosh, you have traction. You must be having some product market fit. Or you wouldn't be having this traction. So if you've got traction, putting it up there early can be enormously useful. So first slide typically is, it's a way for people to reach you. But in your logo, it can be a way to show some marketing savvy and judgment. And in your tagline in particular, a way to show that you understand marketing, copywriting, positioning. This is something I recommend all founders do some studies on, or even some courses or some books. Copywriting is an absolutely crucial skill that is not the same as real writing. I kind of learned that the hard way myself, because I thought I was a fine writer, and then I realized that copywriting is a totally different animal. Typically, the next slide is yet another opportunity to convey a solid grasp of your product market fit and your positioning in the market, again, including some copywriting. Now, you can see here an improvement in Google's value prop. On the left, you can see what does it do for users. And that might be an understandable framing to start with. But ultimately it's wrong because the users who are doing the searches are not the source of Google's revenue. If you look on the right, you see that we've fixed that. The real value prop is about its customers, and those are the advertisers paying the bills. And so you see the three elements there: what it is, who it's for, and what are the values gained or the pain reduced. So the value prop is a useful thing to do. You can spend a good bit of time on crafting it, but it doesn't take up a lot of time or space in your slide deck. Now, getting the right problem of the right customer is perhaps, in my experience, the single most crucial concept, let alone slide, to get right. To begin the classic hero's journey of you and your solution, you want to be really clear about what are the pains that you're trying to solve. And the failure to convey the existence of the pain is ultimately like failing to convey market demand, because pain is a kind of proxy for the degree or intensity of market demand. And failing to show rather than tell the story of your customer's pain will make it less logically and emotionally convincing. Now, one of the things I see quite often is that we get into what I call policy making on the pain slide. We're using statistics about X% of people don't have this, or X% of people suffer from a lack of that. And I call it policy making because it's an abstraction, and it's not even talking about a specific customer. It's really a trap that's easy to fall into, but I think the way to stay out of it is you pick a relatable protagonist, an actual concrete person or avatar, a persona, you might heard of it called, and you give that person the pain. So whether you could do an analytical approach, right, which isn't going to evoke emotion and therefore is not going to be particularly compelling or memorable, or you can begin to focus on a story approach. Data is level one storytelling and persuasion. Story is the next level. So in my company at Physician Cognition, we evoked a person's very real pain when visiting a doctor. And we took that person through the journey of both not having our product and suffering more, and using our product and suffering a lot less. And people could really feel that because we've all known people who've been in this situation. We all have mothers and so forth. Now, another pro tip I teach my clients how to do is to seamlessly continue the entire arc of your target customer, here Sue, throughout the pitch. This is maximum focus, maximum proof of a product market fit. You can see here a number of slides where you keep coming back to the same target customer in many of the slides, right? And again, you can grab a copy of this off the site. I know that this is more content than you're probably going to want to take notes on. So that's an important piece. Next, so the MVP display is next, right? Here's your solution. Ideally, this slide resolves or mentions the pains you identified in the problem slide, okay? I don't recommend announcing the solution first, like some people do, even before the pain at the very top of the slide. If the audience isn't intimately familiar with what you're doing, your implicit claim that your solution solves a need of adequate size is not going to be convincing. More importantly, though, if you start with the ending of the movie, which this essentially is, you're going to kill suspense. You're de-emphasizing the role of the hero if you don't show the hero solving the problem through ingenuity and other strengths to reach the solution. So I don't recommend putting the solution too soon. I would put it after the pain. Emma has ably covered what makes an MVP, so I'll move on from this slide. Now, founders use several methods of displaying their solution. In short, use what you have, but demos and prototypes are ideal, especially if you're not ready to do an interpretive dance. That's the last item. So use what you have there. Airbnb shows us that you can use a pretty simple display of a solution. Simply making sure to mention what gains are created by your solution, what pains are eliminated by the solution. The pro tip here, and Airbnb didn't necessarily follow it, is to dramatize your solution by giving us actual scenes or images, stories or case studies that show how someone's life or work will be different after using your product or service. So you can show them before using it when the pain is great, and then in the solution, you know, you show happy people, that sort of thing. It's unusually powerful. Uber has shown us that mediocre slides, though, are not always fatal. The slide on the left falls far short of its potential. It looks to me like a first draft. There's way too much text. Are you listening to me trying to read, or are you reading yourself? Either way, you've absorbed less of the slide and less of me because there's just too much there. So this is another reason we use a 30-point slide, is because it makes this kind of slide impossible. And again, without a relatable character and no imagery, there's no emotions produced here. These guys got lucky. A lot of pitches don't have a why now slide, and that's fine, but you may have compelling reasons to include one. You might, for example, show how similar companies have been cashing out on a particular type of product or business model that's similar. Or you might show that the pain, which is already great, is simply growing, or is being recognized further and further as untenable or unbearable, and therefore the market is just panting for your product. The next slide topic, of course, you get into your target market. What's the size? What's the opportunity? Now, what typically excites investors is the idea that there is a very large addressable market available. Okay, this gets them interested, but also that you don't intend to try to boil the ocean and go after the entire market at once. So if you can also then show a serviceable addressable market, which will come up again in your go-to-market slide, this shows that you have some discipline. It shows that you're familiar with lean concepts of focusing on, you know, one market at a time and improving your case. All right. Now, the competitive analysis, obviously, you don't just compare yourself with competitors, but also substitutes. And you typically want to include as your criteria in your slide the pains that come from the problem slide, which were also addressed in your solution slide. And I like it to be comprehensive. The 2x2 matrix that's very popular and graphically quite lovely doesn't really give me that much information. It doesn't really give me an education in the landscape of what this industry is and who's out there and what do they do well on all the features that customers care about. So I do prefer something that's a bit busier, but lets me see at a glance how a product stacks up in the entire market on a number of relevant features, and not just in a 2x2. We can bring in a lot more relevant features in a matrix like this. Now, the product slide allows you to get into more of the nerdy detail of your solution. In other words, you don't have to describe every feature and your development roadmap all in your solution slide. In the product slide is when you can get into that kind of wonderfully nerdy detail where you've probably been spending most of your time anyway, in the early stages of your product. So this is the time to sort of get into some of these issues. Not a lot of new information here, but you need to show investors how your product or service is going to make money. What are you going to charge? You know, who's going to pay the bills? It doesn't have to be lots of text or even lots of numbers, as you can see in this Airbnb slide. Okay, it can just be pretty simple. This is we're going to take 10%. You know, these are the relevant markets, the average number of nights, and so, you know, here's our estimate of what we'll make. If you have questions, you know, come see us after the pitch, and we'll give you the numbers that show all this. All right, the go-to-market slide. This is a time to show how you intend to get your product in the hands of the customers, but more importantly, how realistic or knowledgeable you are about not just marketing, but the real world. You know, who are the likely partners? Do you have a good understanding of positioning and advertising? Do you seem to understand what your market wants? And in whoops, let me go to the team slide in a minute. Yeah, so that's basically the go-to-market is, this is something that VCs often look at and say, your strategy isn't really based in the real world. It's some sort of wishful thinking. So this is a good area to talk to some of your mentors and experts about. Team is absolutely foundational. It can turn people toward your investment or away from it, depending on whether the team looks relevant, looks experienced, looks like the right team at the right time, and so forth. You know, investors typically like to focus on people who have prior experience themselves, or especially together as a team. Okay, so the solo college dropout who becomes a billionaire, it makes for great movies, but it's extremely rare. Typically, investors are looking for people with prior success, or at least for teams that work really well together and ideally have done so in the past. Financial projections. One key item here is you don't really want or need to paste in-depth spreadsheets, okay? You just need to give a 3-year bottom-up forecast. You need to show that you understand some of the key drivers and metrics of your revenue and expenses, and you know how that's going to play out over the years. Okay, so everybody knows that financial projections are largely made up. Some investors don't even want to see your hockey stick because they know it's sort of a game. And this is another reason that you can stay simple and let them see your spreadsheet if you get to due diligence. Now, I mentioned if you have traction, and these are various forms of traction, that you want to explain that early. You want to get very early into, do you have customers? Do you have revenue? In other words, investors want to mitigate their risk. And if you can show that people are already investing time, money, or reputation in you and your product, then it's a way of showing product market fit. You've hit the ground running, you're already at a sprint maybe, or a jog, and their risk is reduced. So this is critical. Any questions about that? Be happy to answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Cameron. It looks like the 15 minutes is going to be up soon.
Thank you. This is pretty much toward the end here. You know, various ways to show traction here. This is one graphical representation. And again, Uber can show you how not to do it well. Very silly kind of traction. Then you've got an ask. And then finally, when you're done talking, it's good to have, I think, a summary. I got this from the Rocky Mountain Venture Club. This is what they like to recommend doing. You put up a summary of your deal, right? We've got the dream team, and this is our exit strategy, and here's our traction, and it's a constant reminder as you do the Q&A. So we can now do the Q&A. Any questions?
So as I'm reading off the questions, is it possible you can turn on your video, Cameron?
Yeah, I'm trying. There we go. All right.
All right.
That was a sprint right through the deck, but let's have your questions.
That was really helpful. Thank you. The first question is, what if you're pre-seed and don't have traction? What do you think about that?
Well, probably good to clarify, this is a deck for how to raise money for financially motivated investors. So if you're looking at friends and family, if you're looking at people who have a strategic need for your product or service, like a strategic investor, it's going to be a slightly different standard perhaps, or even if you're looking for maybe a grant, a government grant or a foundation grant. But you know, there are generally financial investors are going to look for traction to give you seed, and you may define what that traction is. But if you don't have an MVP, for example, if you don't have any evidence of market research, that's going to be harder.
Got it. And other than sales, what would constitute good traction?
Well, media attention. I mean, and there was a slide that kind of lists a number of them, but that you're getting media attention, that you've got partners, that you've got letters of intent from potential customers. It could be number of installs. It could be website visits. You know, it's just any form of showing that people are seeing what you've got and they're interested enough to spend time, money, or even invest their reputation in what you're doing.
All right, perfect. And another question that just came in, just confirming with the Google value proposition statement, if your buyer is different from your end user, you should focus the VP on the buyer?
Yeah, the person paying the bills is ultimately the one that cares about the value proposition. You can certainly mention the value proposition to users because the buyer might care about the fact that users are getting something out of it. But ultimately, the value proposition is the proposition of value you're offering to someone in exchange for money.
All right, perfect. That was valuable. Here's a little bit of a long one. I'm currently a single member endeavor and college graduate with just some sales experience. I have confirmation for stakeholders to test an MVP, yet I do not have a team to develop it. What are some other tips for showing my legitimacy despite not having a team?
Well, you know, I mean, traction certainly does. You know, if you've got advisors that seem like they're accomplished or very relevant, that can certainly help. If you know, if you've got any kind of track record of building things or selling things or whatever, but you know, if you don't have that, you can't worry about it. You know, you have to go forward with what you have. You say, look, I'm still building my team. You can ask for referrals for, you know, look, I need a technical co-founder, or I need a marketing co-founder. And just be open and front about the fact that you know that you need to build it out. And this is, you know, this is how far you've gotten so far on your own. Okay. And just hang in there.
Perfect. Cameron, how do you determine valuation for pre-revenue ventures focusing on emerging markets where there's only a few data points on platforms such as PitchBook, etc.?
Well, kind of like market projections, it's typically entirely made up, entirely subjective. This is why a lot of startups don't try to do valuations. So if you look at the agreements that Y Combinator provides, for example, for their convertible notes, they typically are not setting a valuation at all because it's a hazardous enterprise with no track record and no revenue. And they just basically kick the can down the road. And they, you know, convertible note will say, no valuation set here. We will accept the valuation set in the A round. And because we're investing early, we will get discounts, also known as warrants, of maybe 10 or 20%. So, but we're investing alongside the Series A investors at the valuation that's set at that later date. If someone's asking you to set a valuation early, or maybe worse, you're trying to set one, I would reconsider it and contact me if you want to chat about it further.
All right. What if you have a product and services company and you have traction and revenue, but not from the product yet, but the services are to customers who are your target market for the product? Should you include that revenue?
Well, I guess I would include it just to show that the team knows how to extract money from customers, and that you've built something that has a sort of minimum viable product or service aspect to it. Better yet, if you can draw parallels between the service you're providing and the product you'll be providing, and use the service revenue as essentially proof of the market demand and the product market fit. That would be ideal, is to say, look, we've got a service that's providing a very similar value proposition to the software that we're building, and people already love that. And so that not only proves the product market fit, but we may actually have some customers for the software because they totally get it.
Okay. All right, and one last question, Cameron. We've gotten a lot of them. All right, let's see here.
Yeah, feel free to reach out, Cameron at highperformancestory.com. Go to the website, get the deck. I'm happy to chat.
Sure, of course. Can you share a little bit about differences between the deck you send in an email to an investor prospect as opposed to the deck we use to pitch directly?
Well, that's a good question. I think really it boils down to if you're sending a deck that's not going to be presented, then you don't have quite the same issues with text. Although I wouldn't necessarily add to the text on the decks. I would, maybe you can explain a bit more on the decks because you tell yourself people are going to read this instead of you presenting it and people trying to read while you're presenting whatever. But you might just put your the additional detail, the presentation detail down in the notes, and then make sure your cover letter informs the investor that the clarifying pitch information is in the notes section.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I really appreciate you coming on today, Cameron. That's really valuable. And I'm sure that everyone learned a lot. The rest of the questions, as we said, will be shared over email. And just as a reminder, after each presentation, there is a mentorship, there is a feedback form where we can inquire for private mentorship sessions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Cameron.